What's up, everybody? Matt Gajewski here, back again with the Awesemo Fantasy Football YouTube channel. And it is draft day, and we have a treat for you guys. It is me, it is Nick Lepri on Twitter at Notorious Fantasy. I am on Twitter at Matt underscore Gajewski, and we are going through our final mock draft ahead of the 2022 NFL Draft. Nick, what's up? Are you excited tonight?
Yes, I'm very excited. Now, I'm a Dolphins fan, so we do not have a pick tonight, but at the end of the day, I'm very happy with Tyreek Hill, so I'm very excited for tonight. I love draft day, and I feel like this is one of the weirdest drafts because I don't feel very confident in the first three picks of the draft, whereas every other year it feels like it's just locked and loaded.
Yeah, man, I'm a Bears fan. We don't have a pick tonight either. I'm not sure if I'm happy with the moves the Bears have made to get to this point. We don't have Tyreek Hill on our roster. We have Justin Fields and essentially nothing surrounding him. Maybe the worst offense in football. So I don't know. I'm happy for your Dolphins though. I'm excited for the draft. We're gonna just go pick by pick. Nick and I have both done a mock draft at this point. You can find them over on Awesemo. I did one with prop bets associated with it. If you are one of the sickos in a legal betting state going through each and every bet in the first round prop wise, we're just going to compare our mocks, talk team needs, and where we think these teams might go. Before we get started, our show is brought to you today by Underdog Fantasy. And if you don't know Underdog, they have all kinds of contests available to you guys. They have best ball drafts, live drafts, pick 'em contests, and you can make up to 20 extra entry fee. If you use the promo code Awesemo, that is going to get you a match deposit bonus up to $100. So check out Underdog Fantasy today. You ready to get into this, Nick?
Yes, I'm very excited. Let's get on into it.
All right. So this first pick overall, Jacksonville, we've seen a ton of discussion about this team, kind of the divide between ownership, their leadership, and then their head coach. I think the favorites right now, Trevon Walker, he's minus 450, depending on which books you're looking at. But there's a couple of reports about Ike Aquanu in the offensive line. Obviously, that would help Trevor Lawrence. This team has a lot of needs, but is there a direction you see this team going?
Yeah, now initially when I did my mock draft, I felt as though it was 50-50. I thought they would go Aiden Hutchinson. That's what it kind of seemed like. But now it seems basically almost locked in that it is going to be Trayvon Walker. So I think that's where they ultimately lean. But like you said, I think they could use Icky for the offensive line when you draft Trevor Lawrence, who was not what they thought he was going to be last year. Now, does that mean that he's going to stink in the NFL? Probably not, right? He did have Urban Meyer as his head coach, but I think that they could go offensive line, but I think they go Trayvon Walker.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's funny. On Monday, when I did my first mock, Aiden Hutchinson was still the favorite.
Yeah.
And we've just gotten so many reports at this point. Trevon Walker, he kind of fits the mold of a Trent Baalke player. He's big, he's athletic, he's long, and he's produced at Georgia, which, I mean, best defensive line in football. So I'll bring the mock up on the screen. We both had Trayvon Walker. So I think we stick with that. Detroit is a team, I think early in the process, when people were mocking Hutchinson to Detroit, they were like, all right, well, the Lions would obviously love to get their hands on the hometown kid. Aiden Hutchinson played his college ball at Michigan. Where do they go if he's not there? In my opinion, in my mock, they kind of luck out here, and Hutchinson's still on the board. They have a lot of needs as well. So, my first question to you is what do you think those main needs are? And do you think Hutchinson is that perfect marriage?
Yeah, I think Hutchinson is a perfect pick. I would be very surprised if they went quarterback at the number two spot here. They do have a pick later on in the draft at 32. Now, would it surprise you personally if they went with a quarterback? I don't think it should be that surprising, but I would not lean that way. I think they end up going with Hutchinson since he fell here, but they also could use offensive line. Every team that is bad needs offensive line. Every team that is good also needs offensive line. So you can never really go wrong that way. But here I think they do end up going with Hutchinson.
We're in agreement here. Earlier this week, he was plus 225 to go number two. That's now minus 200. So, reading the tea leaves, it does appear Aiden Hutchinson is the favorite here. You and I are in consensus again, so we'll keep the trend moving. Houston's on the board at number three. This is where things get a little bit weird, and I think the main decision point of this draft starts. A lot of people are mocking them cornerback, Sauce Gardner. I personally think Kayvon Thibodeau could be a good fit for them, just taking best available player. I'm not sure what you think about the character concerns, but some people do believe they exist. And, they're a team that could be looking at quarterback as well. What do you think the main needs for Houston could be tonight?
The Houston Texans are a team that have holes basically everywhere. Offense, defense. I personally mocked them Icky Aquanu initially. Will they go that way though? That is definitely the safer bet. I could see them going with Sauce Gardner. There's a lot of smoke about Stingley going here at number three. The first three picks of Walker, Hutchinson, And then Stingley, I believe, was just plus 400 yesterday. So that seems like the favorite there. I personally think that they will end up probably going with more of the flashier play. I hope they don't go Thibodeau. I bet him to go pick over 4.5. And that was at plus 150 or plus 190. So I'm hoping that bet hits. If it doesn't, it is what it is, though. So we're going to go here. I'm going to assume they're going to take someone on defense. They're going to go Sauce Gardner.
My inclination was they're either going to go corner or go edge. And it's funny, Sauce Gardner's now, excuse me, Derek Stingley's now the betting favorite over Sauce Gardner
Yeah.
at number 3, which is crazy in my opinion. But Stingley, we know what he is. I personally had this as Thibodeau, so we're just going for graphics off my mock, but I'll try to give you some reasons why. I mean, this edge group is one of the worst in football. You look at Okoronkwo on the edge, they use Grenard on the other side. They bring in Malik Collins and Ross Blacklock. Those are a couple players over the last few years they've added, but I still think they need immense help in that unit. When I look at their corners, they at least have some names you'll recognize. Desmond King, Lonnie Johnson, MJ Stewart's on the team. I don't think those are players that are Pro Bowl caliber by any means, but I do think edge is a bigger need for this team. Lovey Smith, defensive oriented coach, perhaps he could get the most out of Thibodeau and avoid some of those character concerns. At number 4, the Jets are on the clock. And I mean, a common theme of the teams at the top here needs really across the board. The Jets have the young quarterback, Zach Wilson, similar to Trevor Lawrence. I think you could argue not what they expected to get that high in the draft, but they also didn't necessarily surround him with the best supporting cast. So with the Jets picking twice in the top 10, do you see them addressing offense immediately and helping Zach Wilson or going a different direction?
Personally, on my mock, I had them going with Sauce Gardner. I know I just said that at 3, Sauce Gardner could go. So if he wasn't there, then I think they could end up taking Stingley. The Jets, there's a lot of smoke right now about them potentially trading for Debo Samuel during the draft. Obviously, right now, when we're doing this, we're just not going to do trading because that's just crazy to assume that some trade is going to happen that isn't set in stone. But I think it is entirely possible that they trade this pick and maybe even the 10th pick to go ahead and get Debo. They drafted last season. They got a wide receiver that does look pretty good. Not saying that he's like the next Megatron or something, but he does look solid. I think they look to address the defense here at this pick. And then I think later on at number 10, if there are some solid O linemen available, I wouldn't be surprised if they went that way. So for the purposes of this mock, since Sauce Gardner is still available, I think that's where they would go.
Yeah, I wanna ask you a question about the draft overall, but I do agree with you overall. If Debo is in play for this team, I think they probably address defense. They don't need to draft a receiver if they're trying to make a play for Debo. But in my opinion, I think there's 3 positions of strength up at the top here, maybe 4. Edge, offensive line, probably corner because there's the 2 elite names, and receiver. Receiver's the deepest of those positions. So I wouldn't be surprised if they try to wait and take a receiver at number 10. But I also think you're playing this waiting game where there's 5 big names and there's a lot of teams in the back half of the first that need receivers. So do you think any of those teams could trade up and that could be something the Jets look at here? I'll just tell you right now, in my mock, I had Garrett Wilson going at 4. Just get the receiver that you want in this draft. Wilson's highly productive at Ohio State, and that kind of avoids the potential run on receivers after this. But what do you think about the receiver class? And do you think it's a position that's going to come off the board early and often?
Yeah, I believe there's going to be a lot taken in the first round, just around pick 10. Like when I think the Jets might take the receiver again at 4, it does make sense. They could just reach up and take Wilson. But going around them, the Washington football team, they could easily take a wide receiver. The Texans, the Eagles, the Saints again at 19. I don't think they're going to take 2 receivers, but you never know. And the Eagles as well. So there's a bunch of teams up there. And I've even seen some people mock a receiver to the Chargers, despite the fact that they have Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. So there's a lot of teams in the 10 to 20 range that could look to pick a wide receiver. So if you want to cement the fact that you're going to get Garrett Wilson, if you love Garrett Wilson, then it makes sense to take him at 4.
Yeah, and I don't even necessarily think it's Garrett Wilson. For the purposes of my mock, I mean, he's the betting favorite to be the first receiver drafted. Made a lot of sense for the Jets here. But overall, I do agree with you. I think they could wait to 10 if they kind of see these guys similarly and then just pick whoever is left. At number 5, we have the other New York team, the Giants, also with 2 top 10 picks. I think this team might not have quite as many needs. They seem to be at least going all in for Daniel Jones this year. They've addressed the offensive line in previous drafts. I don't necessarily think that prevents them from doing the same thing here. Like you mentioned earlier, you can always use more offensive linemen. Is that the way you see them going, or do you think they go a different direction?
I personally think they almost have to go offensive linemen. The receivers in this class are good, like you said, but Kadarius Toney did report to camp. So my thought process now is maybe he's not as much of a diva as it seemed like. He's just going to end up playing there. He doesn't want out. He even put on Instagram that like these were all rumors. Don't believe what you see on the internet. All this. So maybe that didn't even happen, and it just came out. They have Kenny Galladay. They have like the most paid wide receiver room that sucks in the NFL. It's actually unreal that him and Kenny Galladay had 0 total touchdowns last year and they get paid all this money. But I think they go offensive line if they really want to see what Daniel Jones can be. I don't think Daniel Jones is very good, but maybe without Joe Judge, he's able to improve. So at 5, I think they go O lineman. I had them going Charles Cross, but Icky is still available, so I think they would go Icky.
Yeah, I personally in my betting mock I had Evan Neal here. Just he was a large underdog to go first overall among offensive linemen. And I think there's honestly, I think there's a chance any of those three could go in my personal rankings. I'm in conjunction with you. I think Icky's one. Evan Neal Cross, I think you could go back and forth depending on their skill sets. We'll talk about Cross a little later. I think that's also a dark horse spot for maybe a Stingley or a Sauce Gardner if they're still available, just with
Yeah.
the woes they have with James Bradbury. But you can't go wrong selecting offensive line. They have Andrew Thomas, but they don't have much else there. So I think it makes a lot of sense. The real question in the top 10, outside of Houston at 3, who they pick, is does Carolina even stay at number 6? They're a team without a day 2 pick. They have needs seemingly across the board outside of DJ Moore and Christian McCaffrey on offense. We're not projecting trades. Assuming Carolina sticks with this pick, do they go quarterback or do you think they go a different direction?
I think they basically have to go quarterback. I don't think my eyes will be able to stand watching Sam Darnold play 16, 17 games next year. I might be seeing ghosts after that one. It's going to be bad. So I would think they lean quarterback. Now, there seems to be a lot of talk about this being Kenny Pickett, but then I also read that the Carolina Panthers had great meetings with every single quarterback. So the fact that they're just pumping up Kenny Pickett makes me think maybe it'll be Malik Willis. If I think they go quarterback, I think it would be Willis personally.
I think quarterback is certainly on the board for them. I mean, Sam Darnold, like the PJ Walker experiment, they just didn't have the offensive production. I think their skill position players are decent. I mean, DJ Moore, he's a Pro Bowl caliber player. Robbie Anderson has played like that at times in his career. Terrace Marshall, very young player. They also have a couple other younger names. Their offensive line could certainly need help. I mean, when you look at Elfline coming over, Irving, Moton, those aren't the best names. So Ike Kwanu is still on the board in this draft. I think he's a solid bet to go ahead of this, but just for the purposes of this exercise, I think if him or Evan Neal would be there, that would be the pick. If either of them are gone, which they could be, maybe you see a Charles Cross and then maybe you see a quarterback. But again, this is one of the picks that is most associated with the trade market in this draft. Now, when we go to 7, we have the New York Giants back on the clock again. They just picked, and we talked about them taking an offensive lineman. I think they very well could do that. Assuming they don't double up on the position, where else do you think they could go in the top 10?
Yeah, I definitely don't think they're going to go wide receiver here, and I would definitely not assume that they would double up on O tackle. Now, I personally think that it is possible that the Giants could go quarterback, but probably not. And your pick here would have been Sauce Gardner. I completely agree with you. The fact that him as well as Stingley made it this far to me is a little bit shocking, but not entirely, obviously, when there's this many offensive tackles, when there's this many edge rushers, and when the Jets do something crazy like take Garrett Wilson, which is possible. They are the Jets after all. I think Sauce Gardner is a great pick here, and I think they would look to address the defense after they went O line with the first pick.
Yeah, I'll just give you my reasoning for that. Part of it is historically corners aren't going that high in drafts, and the ones that haven't necessarily played up to it. Most recently, we're talking Jeff Okuda. There's some injury risk there. But the top of drafts, usually we're seeing quarterbacks. Obviously, we don't have that this year, but we're also seeing edge rushers. We know there's the big 3, and I don't think Thibodeau is going to slide as much as people think he is. And then we have the offensive linemen. So could you see teams maybe avoid Sauce early on? Or I think there's a trade partner maybe in there that could see Sauce go higher, but I wouldn't be terribly surprised if there's a fall for the Giants here. It's basically a marriage they would love. James Bradbury reportedly wanted out. They have Adoree Jackson, but he hasn't played up to his draft capital. They could certainly use another corner. I think it makes sense whether it's Sauce or Stingley. And then we come to Atlanta. Atlanta's another team that is mocked quarterback a lot. I think their game plan is sort of use Mariota as the stopgap this year, try to get as many blue chip players as they can, and then make a play on a future quarterback. But I don't think everyone's in agreement with that. Where do you think they would go? And do you think the quarterback is a legit possibility?
To be honest, I think they do wait until next year to take a quarterback. I think they realize that this team's going to be a dumpster fire this year with Mariota. They just stick it out. You don't have Calvin Ridley because he'd rather gamble on the draft than go ahead and actually play. So I think that they end up potentially going wide receiver here. And if this is how the draft fell, I wouldn't be surprised if they went with a guy like you put Jameson Williams. I think they could easily pick Drake London here as well.
I love Drake London. I actually bet Drake London. It was plus 500 or something to go wide receiver number one in this draft. Not number one overall, but the first receiver taken. I
Yeah.
bet that a long time ago. And I think that's possible here. A lot of people talk about the size he would bring to this offense. I think you need a lot of speed too, which is why I put Jamison Williams. We also got some positive reports from him just in his rehab. It looks like he's going to miss fewer games than expected, and he's the best speed in this class. That gives them something that they don't really have. When Ridley plays, he does offer that speed, but you already have Pitts offering size. So I think that would make more of a complement to the offense. But Drake London, I think, is plenty athletic and he'll play the boundary for them for sure if that ends up being the pick. But you and I both agree that it's a receiver. Just with the market and the astronomical numbers these receivers are getting paid, it makes a lot of sense to surround your future quarterback with cheap rookie receivers as well. Seattle's on the board here. This is the spot where a lot of people say Kayvon Thibodeau would go if he's available. We have him coming off a little earlier, but I do think that is probably his floor. Pete Carroll, defensive coach. He's somebody that can obviously use Thibodeau, very familiar with him coming out of that Mountain West region. What do you think Seattle does here?
Quarterback is still available. They now have Drew Lock as their starting quarterback. I mocked them Stingley here. I think that they want to get back to being more of a defensive team without Russell Wilson there. So I think Stingley's a good spot there.
Yeah, I agree with you on Stingley. My question is, this is another team, and it's similar to the Texans, where I had Stingley and an edge rusher for the Texans. Now we have Stingley and we have Jermaine Johnson, another guy getting some top 10 hype. Do they prioritize the edge or the corner? And I think these are the two most important positions on defense. So it kind of depends on how you value them. This edge group, I think, is worse than the Texans and probably the worst in football. You have like Uchenna Nwosu. They absolutely whiffed on LJ Collier a few years ago. This edge group is horrific. So Jermaine Johnson makes sense to me, but if they decide for whatever reason they just have a higher valuation on Stingley, and it could be as simple as that, I think he makes plenty of sense for this team too. They are weak at cornerback, but as you can see, I had corners slipping a little bit in this draft. That finally stops for me at 10 with Derek Stingley to the Jets. You had this as a possibility at 4, so I think you like the fit. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, no, you're 100% correct. They went receiver 4. I had it like flip-flopped in my mock. I had them going corner 4 and then at 10 going with Drake London, but I think that the Jets are in need of defense here. I think the Jets are a team that maybe 2 years from now, if Robert Saleh is legit as well as if Zach Wilson is legit, could be a real team. Now the AFC is absolutely loaded at this point with all of these star players and all these great teams, but the Jets are a team that are a couple years out. I think they take it kind of safe here, and I don't think you can go wrong with Stingley, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. This draft has kind of shades of the John Ross draft, where receivers were expected, like it was a deeper receiver class at the top, and we saw them come off the board early in mocks, but then they came off the board even earlier on the actual NFL draft because of the priority to the position. So that's why I put Garrett Wilson over Stingley at 4. But I honestly could see this flip flop like you had it as well. Washington at 11, you hinted at the fact you think they could maybe look at a receiver. What do you see them doing here?
Yeah, now initially in my mock, I had them going with Garrett Wilson. Garrett Wilson is gone, and then you have them going Drake London. That would be my next best receiver available. So I would agree with that. Going with Drake London. They do have Terry McLaurin, who is kind of old for how long he's been in the NFL. I think they're going to have to pay him the big bucks. They're going to give him the money because he has shown the talent. He hasn't necessarily put up these crazy numbers because the quarterback situation in Washington has been terrible. They did bring in Carson Wentz, so I don't think they can draft a quarterback, but I don't think Carson Wentz is the answer at all, but I'm fine with Drake London.
Yeah, I think Drake London, just best available receiver here. Makes a lot of sense. Outside of perhaps Carolina, I think Minnesota is another team that's sort of a wild card in this draft. They have new management, so I was expecting an analytical approach, at least to somewhat of a changing of the guard. But it seems like they're just getting the band back together with Kirk Cousins and company. I'm not really sure where they go with the new regime. Do you have a feel on this?
Yeah, in my mock, I took them going with Kyle Hamilton, the safety out of Notre Dame. I'm not someone who has done some crazy analytics on or some crazy look at Kyle Hamilton. I haven't watched a lot of tape, but it does seem as though he could be much better than how people have him ranked. I've seen some people have him ranked outside the top 25. just as a big board as a whole. I think Kyle Hamilton would fit well on this team, and I think they really need defense. The secondary there is lacking big time. I think their offense is solid again. I'm not a big fan of Kirk Cousins, but I think he's better than most people give him credit for. So I think they would look to address defense and go with Kyle Hamilton.
I think they go defense as well. I agree with everything you said about offense. They put a lot of resources into the offensive line for as middling of a unit as that is. They're fine at receiver. Irv Smith comes back, and they're going back to Kirk Cousins. The issue I have with Kyle Hamilton, he plays a devalued position of safety. He plays a position in this draft that is deep. There's a lot of safeties, and he didn't test athletically where we expected him to. He was about a 4.7 athlete playing safety. And I mean, I'm not a huge tape grinder myself. I'm a Notre Dame fan. So when I watch him, he certainly looks faster than that. So I don't know what to make of the discrepancy there. But ultimately, I think this department is going to be analytically sound, which is why I had Jordan Davis coming off the board. And I think he's kind of this middling prospect where he's athletically breaking models, but on the field, he leaves a little bit to be desired. And I don't think that's any knock against him. He played for the Georgia defense, which has maybe 5 first round picks on it. So they could rotate their players a little more than even some NFL teams. So the fact that Jordan Davis didn't have as much production doesn't worry me. With his athletic profile, I think he makes sense for an interior defensive line, which is not what it once was. But ultimately, I agree with you. I think they go defense. Houston's on the board again here. You and I both believe defense is a need for them. We talked about Thibodeau or Sauce or Stingley. They also have needs on offense. I think they could try to surround their young quarterback with more weapons. They do have a lot of resources invested in the O line, but I'm not sure Titus Howard is a tackle of the future. So maybe they try to take a sliding Charles Cross. He hasn't come off the board yet. I think he's a strong possibility to go earlier than this. But ultimately, do you think they go offense to help their young QB?
I think that they could end up going with offense here. And the name I was going to bring up is the name you just threw onto the screen here, Chris Olave. I think that Olave could potentially fall a little bit later to maybe the Eagles or the Saints, which is where I had him in my mock. But if this is what is available here, I think that they could go wide receiver. Personally, if I was the team, though, I would end up going with Charles Cross to try to protect Davis Mills. I don't think Davis Mills is the guy for the next 5, 10 years, but he's a little bit better than people give him credit for.
Yeah, I love Chris Olave. I think the fit here makes sense too. You have Brandon Cooks, who is more of your speedster, your vertical threat. You have Nico Collins, who profiles as an X. I'm not going to put him in the category of like starting future X receiver, but Olave looks like a Z. He's a superb route runner, a high level producer at Ohio State each of his years with the college program. So I think he makes sense here. And for Baltimore, I mean, eventually Charles Cross has to go. This is where I had him in my mock. I think there's a strong chance he goes higher than this. His over under just prop space is in the top 10. But again, a lot of these books have more players with their over unders in the top 10 than there actually are top 10 selections. So not everyone can go. With Cross, I don't think he's a fit for everybody. He plays for that Mike Leach air raid system at Mississippi State, the same system that, we saw a guy like Andre Dillard come out of that has had his struggles in the pros. He has a lot of pass blocking sets. I don't think that's the best fit for the Ravens, who obviously aren't the pass heaviest team in the NFL, but ultimately he's just the best available player. And the Ravens, I think they would just take the tackle if he's there. But let's assume Charles Cross is gone because I think there's a lot of needs for these teams at offensive linemen ahead of them. Where else do you think the Ravens could go?
I think here the Ravens could go corner. Now, most people wouldn't say that Trent McDuffie is up there with Stingley, up there with Sauce Gardner, but I do think here if the Ravens are available, that could be a big need for them defensively. He can play kind of inside, outside, either way for Mr. Trent McDuffie, so I think he would be a fine pick here if I was the Ravens. What do you think about that?
I like Trent McDuffie. The issues with him, and I don't know how the Ravens prioritize their corners. He's not big. He's not as athletic as we thought. And he's just going to be off some teams' boards because he's not a press man corner. And some teams might view him as a slot only. Again, his production is off the chart. So if he is a fit for what the Ravens run, I think he could be. He would make sense here. And just a little spoiler, I don't have him going too much further down this draft board. So he'll be a guy we talk about a little more soon. Philly's on the clock. And this is a situation I just wanted to bring up to you and why I have the mock going the way it did. If the big four receivers come off the board in the top 14, we're kind of looking at a situation where Philly, New Orleans, Green Bay, Kansas City, whoever you want in the second half is boxed out of the good receivers.
Yeah.
Do you think Philly could reach here or would they go a different direction?
I think it is entirely possible that they do reach. The Eagles don't have the best track record of drafting receivers in the first round. I mean, Devontae Smith looks like a hit, but prior to that, it has not looked the greatest for them. JG Arthega Whiteside now plays tight end for the team. So that's how you know things are going pretty wrong. But I think that Burks could be considered almost in that cluster of players with Drake London, Olave, all those other guys. So it would not surprise me at all if they went Burks here. They have a decent amount of needs. They are a team that I don't think is sold on Jalen Hurts, but they are going to give him this year at least. If they draft a quarterback here, this they are the quarterback factory they said they were a couple years ago, I guess, but I don't assume that they do that. So I like Burks here.
Yeah, one of my big stands in this draft is that we see their big five receivers come off earlier than expected. And I don't think it's necessarily the teams in the top 10, top 15 that select them. I think there could be some trade up situations with the teams that have multiple picks in the back half of the first. Philly, New Orleans, Kansas City, Green Bay, all multiple firsts. But we'll keep the train moving. We have New Orleans. They also picked twice in the top 20. They miss out on the receiver run here. If you see a lot of mocks that have just teams picking where they're supposed to, New Orleans often gets a receiver here, but I don't think that's a guarantee unless they trade up. They have a lot of needs, though. Do you think they go offense to help Jameis Winston, maybe a quarterback? What do you think they do?
Personally, I had them going receiver here, but if there is no receiver here, I think they could definitely go defensive wise and go with Jordan Davis out of Georgia. I don't think that defensive line is that amazing. They're definitely a little bit older there. Cam Jordan, I believe his name is. That guy's old as Emac, so I would be pretty worried about him going forward. So I would go ahead and lean defensive wise, but I understand where you got Penning. I had Penning going the next pick to the Chargers. So definitely
Yeah,
makes sense.
so I'll talk about the New Orleans Saints at 19 too, but at 16, I had them going Trevor Penning. He's kind of the replacement to Teron Armstead. Their offensive line is solid, I would say. They're definitely not the offensive line they had previously, but Penning, he's more of a developmental guy coming out of the FCS, played well at the Senior Bowl, which helps, but he's really athletic. I think he could be somebody they take at 19. I actually have them going edge later, so I wouldn't be surprised if these picks are just flipped and they end up with like a Karloftis here, and then they take Penning at 19. Wouldn't surprise me at all. The Chargers, I'm really curious to hear who you have going to a team, which I view at this point has the most complete roster of the teams picking in the top 20. What do you think the Chargers do with kind of a luxury pick?
Yeah, again, I said that I thought they could go Trevor Penning if he was there. I think that they are a team that has basically virtually no holes, and all the wide receivers are gone. So I think if they were sitting here and maybe Burks was available, maybe one of the other wide receivers was there, they can entirely pull the trigger. I agree with you here. I think Trent McDuffie would be a great pick. The Chargers are a team that it seems like every year for the last 3 years, you're thinking, wow, this is one of the best defenses in the NFL if they can stay healthy. And then that if is always like they never stay healthy. They're never healthy. So maybe just shoring up the defense, getting another guy in there would help them out a ton. I think they would go defense, and I agree with McDuffie here.
I think they're primed to take best available player. If that's receiver, makes a lot of sense. If it's offensive line, we're one of the guys to fall. I think it would make sense just a position that they could strengthen. And I think if Jordan Davis is here, it could make sense. They're a team we saw unable to stop the run, even when they tried. With Jordan Davis, I think we could potentially see like a Vita Vea future where he's just the guy you put in the interior. He stops the run almost individually because he's soaking up two, sometimes three offensive linemen, but he's gone at this position. Trent McDuffie's just best available corner, and I think he fits this scheme here. With the Eagles' second pick, they're now up at 18. They've addressed receiver, and they still have some other needs. Maybe defense is someplace they go. Where do you think the Eagles would go with their second pick, assuming they stay and actually make the selection?
Yeah. Now I had them mocked to take N'Kobe Dean, linebacker out of Georgia. I have seen some drastic reports on him, like saying that he might be a top 10 pick, but I've also seen some people say he's not even a first rounder at all. He's going to fall way out of there. So that's making me a little bit nervous about even saying this. But I think that that Georgia defense was just so insane. He won the Butt Kiss Award last year. I think he is a guy that will go in the first round, and I think that it's a pretty solid fit for the Eagles defense.
I like N'Kobe Dean. I had the same concerns, and I didn't put him in my first round mock just because he was left out of a lot of industry ones. I think what you said makes sense. From a talent perspective, he's a first round player, but he's
Yeah.
really small and he's just going to be off some teams' boards. I think we could say the same thing with McDuffie. They just don't view him as the player they use in that scheme. Philadelphia historically doesn't spend a lot of capital on linebackers, but again, he might be somebody you see as like a box type, just defensive back player, like a jack of all trades player in that range too. I think they could double down on offense here, just try to see what they actually have in Jalen Hurts, maybe just get a group together for whatever play they make on a future signal caller. So I had them with Zion Johnson on the interior. They still have Lane Johnson, Kelsey Dickerson from last year, and they're pretty deep overall, but we've seen this unit struggle with injuries. I think adding depth on the offensive line is never something that we should be worried about with this team. They've done it multiple times, even with Dillard. With the Saints at 19, they're back on the clock for their second pick. I'll just go right ahead and say it. I had them taking an edge rusher in George Karlaftis, and I think this could be the pick at 16. You already mentioned their needs along the edge with an aging Cameron Jordan. They've spent a lot of capital on this position with Marcus Davenport and Peyton Turner recently, too. So they clearly prioritize it. I think they could just double right back down and get one of the most productive edge rushers in the class without some of the shine. What do you think of this pick?
Yeah, I definitely think that that's a solid pick here. I think the only other way they could go here is I love Jameis Winston. He's like my favorite quarterback to watch because it's just so random what he does. Some games he looks like Pat Mahomes, other games he looks like Jake Fromm or something. Like he has no idea what to even do. So I'm gonna go ahead and say that I agree with this pick, but I think they could definitely take Kenny Pickett here if he falls all the way to 20, or maybe even go with Malik Willis because he would still be available as well. And then maybe we see 19 and 20 a back-to-back quarterback here.
I think we see a quarterback at 20. And just straight from my notes on this quarterback class, I mocked Malik Willis to the Steelers, and I just wrote straight up the quarterback position lacks any elite prospects, but the positional value will likely put two or three in the first round. The Steelers are a team that often ignores analytics and conventional wisdom. They follow that trend by selecting Malik Willis here. What do you think of the prospect? He's the favorite to be the first quarterback drafted. He's linked to the Steelers often in these mocks. I think it happens. What do you think?
Yeah, I would love Malik Willis to go to the Steelers. I think that probably the team is going to give Trubisky at least some run if this is the case, right? Maybe 5, 6 games. And then we see Malik Willis. We are on the fantasy channel. And if Malik Willis eventually becomes the starter of the Steelers, he legitimately has top 5 points per game upside in my book in fantasy football because of that rushing upside. A lot of people, I even saw some guy that's on TV call him a running back. Like these takes are tired, if I'm being honest with you. It makes no fucking sense to say something like that. I think Malik Willis is amazing and I think he's the best quarterback in this draft. Is he as good as the quarterbacks coming out in the next draft? Who knows? Doesn't seem like it based upon what I've read, but from what I've seen of Malik Willis, I think that he certainly does deserve to be the first quarterback off the board. And if he goes to Pittsburgh, that is an excellent landing spot. Tomlin is just a genius in my book.
I agree with you. I think it's important to decouple real life production from fantasy production. Malik Willis forced more missed tackles than Kenneth Walker this year. Malik Willis led the country in forced missed tackles. So I don't know what that person who compared him to a running back meant, but I mean, he is an elite rusher at the quarterback
Yeah.
position. And I kind of view him similar to a Trey Lance. I'm worried that he might not get a full allotment of games as the starter, but we saw Trey Lance a couple times this past year and he was awesome for fantasy. If Malik Willis even gets
Yeah.
a couple starts, like they're going to be awesome. I think he's a phenomenal fit for just fantasy late round quarterbacks if you're looking that direction. But we have the Patriots at 21. They're another interesting team. They got their quarterback of the future. If receivers there, I think they definitely could look at one. And I wouldn't be surprised if they start reaching in. This is where you see players like Jahan Dotson, Sky Moore come off the board. Ultimately, I don't think the value is there, and I don't think the Patriots would do that. So I have them taking Tyler Smith, an offensive lineman that needs a little bit of development. He's a little raw coming out of Tulsa, but he has good size. He's athletic, and he doesn't really need to play right away. And if they really truly want to, they could move him inside for a year and move him out. He's just best available player at a position that is highly valued. What do you think New England does?
New England, to me, I wrote in my notes that they seem like the most confusing team ever to figure out what they're going to do in the first round. It seems like they just closed their eyes. They let the dog pick that was on TV a couple years ago.
That
It
was
seems like they
awesome.
really have no idea what. Yeah, that was awesome. But it seems like they're just going to pick anyone. It's a lot like the Seattle Seahawks when you see the Seahawks that like pick 24 and they take some guy that's destined to go in the third round. It seems like something the Patriots would do. But in my opinion here, I think that just shoring up the offensive line is always a solid move. I had them going with Devin Lloyd. Again, not some guy that I've seen just being locked and loaded in the first round, but that could be a need for the Patriots. The Patriots defense has completely fallen off compared to the past couple of years, at least in my book.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, look, man, this is a team that took Sony Michelle in the first round. They've taken interior defensive linemen. I don't think they're married to the idea of taking these positions of high value. And a lot of people argue in this day and age that linebacker is a devalued position. They're still looking for the replacements from the linebackers on those elite defenses. So Devin Lloyd would make sense. I don't have him falling much farther just to give you a little bit of a sneak peek. But this also brings us to Green Bay. Green Bay has one glaring need on their team. It is wide receiver post Devontae Adams. I personally think this is a bottom three wide receiver unit in football if the league started today. But fortunately, they have a chance to shore that up. I think if they could, they would trade up. If they could and one of the five receivers fell, they would take them. but I ultimately think they're going to reach on receiver either way. What do you think the Packers do at 22?
I think if they don't take a receiver at 22 or 28, Aaron Rodgers has, in my opinion, he could just retire. Like, I don't think he deserves what has happened to him here. He comes back, they get rid of Devontae Adams, they draft Jordan Love instead of drafting a receiver a few years ago. Maybe they could have Jordan Love play receiver because at the end of the day, they have nothing there. So I think Sky Moore definitely makes sense. Sky Moore is an awesome name as well for a wide receiver.
Love Sky Moore. I think he goes off the board, maybe not before Jahan Dotson, but at least close to him. He's bigger than Jahan Dotson. He's faster than Jahan Dotson, and he has more creative, diverse usage than Jahan Dotson. He also has more production. The only knock is Sky Moore went to Western Michigan and Jahan Dotson went to Penn State. So, I mean, we do have to at least consider that. But there's a lot of reasons to like Sky Moore, and the Packers are a team very analytically sound. I don't know if Jahan Dotson necessarily fits the mold of big athletic receivers that the Packers typically draft. So I went Sky Moore over him. At 23, the Cardinals are on the board. They're another team that's really hard to peg. We've seen them take like hybrid players a lot. They're the team that took Isaiah Simmons. They're the team that took the edge rusher from Temple. I forget his name. I'll look it up while you're talking about the Cardinals. But overall, they're a team that I think is really hard to peg. What do you think they do here?
I think receiver, if there were more available at this point. Now, again, they could take one of those next year at the wide receiver position, but I think if one of those better guys was available, I feel like it's almost a lock that they take him. Even though they have all these other wide receivers, they did lose Christian Kirk because for some reason the Jacksonville Jaguars paid this guy $7 zillion. I personally think that they do end up going edge here, get another guy with JJ Watt, and they go David Ojabo out of Michigan. This is kind of a deeper edge class. I'm not too sure about your opinion on him, but I do think that the Cardinals could look to address that defensive front and go with Ojabo.
Love him as the player, terrified by the injury. The player I was thinking was Hassan Reddick, and they've actually taken linebacker 3 of the last 5 years, depending on what positions you consider Hassan Reddick and Isaiah Simmons. So crazy to see that from the Cardinals. I had them with Kyle Hamilton, just the safety, best available player here. Secondary was widely viewed as one of the worst coming into the league, and then they overachieved. I think he
Uh,
would help, and we've seen the Cardinals make some really weird picks. Dallas is on the clock and they pick at a pretty nice spot here. I think they're kind of primed to pick best available offensive lineman. There's still some talent here. It's not top five, top 10 talent, but someone they could develop long term, which is where I had them going. I'm curious if you had Dallas going a different direction.
Yeah, I had Dallas going the exact same way. I had them going Zion Johnson because I had him going later, but obviously we saw him go at 18 to the Eagles. So I think interior offensive line makes sense. I am reading a lot about the Cowboys wanting to trade up. Again, I don't remember exactly who they wanted, but the Cowboys are a crazy team. They'll do whatever. Jerry Jones loves wide receivers. I don't know why he's so enamored with them. They have CeeDee Lamb, they have Gallup. Sure, they don't have Amari Cooper, but there's other pieces on this team. You don't need these three stud receivers to win. Even when you have three stud receivers, you can't win a fucking playoff game for the Cowboys. So play it safe here. Protect Dak.
This offensive line is not the offensive line from a few years ago. And even the players
Agreed.
that are bona fide studs like Tyron Smith, Zach Martin, they're players that have missed games. So I definitely agree with you. I think if Zion's there, he's the pick. He came off a little bit earlier in mine. So I went next best offensive lineman in Kenyon Green. Kenyon Green has an injury history, so he might not be the pick regardless. But I do think interior offensive line is where Dallas should be targeting at this point in the draft. Then we get to the Buffalo Bills. I think aside from the Chargers, probably the most complete roster in the first round. I'm seeing Brees Hall mocked here repeatedly. Do you actually think this is a possibility?
Yes, I mocked them, Brees Hall. I don't think if you're in the first round in the NFL draft, you should be taking a running back. This isn't fantasy football. This is the real NFL draft. You can find guys in the third, fourth round that are serviceable. You could just keep with the same running back by committee that they have of Devin Singletary, Zach Moss. They even have Duke Johnson on the team. It's not like the most sexy backfield ever, but you can get it done when you have Josh Allen. But I think it is possible that with all of the stuff that I've heard that they just take Brees Hall. They have one of the I think Brees Hall would be a top 5 fantasy running back if he does go there. The guy was fantastic at Iowa State. And while I think it is stupid, I think they do end up doing it.
Man, I am so torn on this pick. I have them going Andrew Booth, and this is solely just the positional value standpoint. And they have Tre'Davious White coming off an injury, so he gives you a little bit of insurance. But ultimately, I see your argument. And this was the team that was rumored to be all in on Travis Etienne last year. They were
Yep.
mocked running backs last year, but they were obviously on the outside looking in for the players that were first round calibers. Running back wouldn't surprise me, but my goodness, man, I just cannot stomach another Clyde Edwards Hilaire situation. For fantasy, though, to your point, that would be amazing. And this is the fantasy channel. So picks I don't like with a lot of fantasy upside, Malik Willis and Brees Hall if they land with the Steelers and the Bills. Titans are on the board. Late steam towards them taking a QB. They can save a lot of money by moving on from Tannehill next year, who took a step back. I kind of buy into this. What do you think the Titans do here?
Yeah, now initially I had them mocked to get Ojabo. We took him a little bit before this, or maybe we didn't. I talked about it. So I think they could take
I had
Ojabo
Ojabo
here.
out of the first just because of the injury. But dude, if somebody loves Ojabo, he was borderline top 15, top 10 player. He might get the Sidney Jones treatment where he just takes a red shirt and he's still a first round pick because teams want that fifth year. I don't think Ojabo's like a lock to fall out of the first round. He could definitely go.
Yeah, I did a lot of research on him. He didn't even play football until his junior year of high school, and he's this humongous dude. It's pretty awesome, to be honest with you. So I think he could go here. But like you said, quarterback is definitely a need. I don't think Tannehill is as bad as he played last year. Last year was a huge fall off compared to the past couple of years for the Titans. So if Pickett is there, I think they could pull the trigger. But I do think Tannehill would play all of this year. I don't see why they would
I
do
agree with you. And
here.
maybe the Tannehill taking a step back is a little overblown. Think about it. Derrick Henry hurt. AJ Brown hurt. Julio
Yeah.
Jones hurt. He was playing with Nick Westbrook Akine as his number one wide receiver for a lot of that season. I mean, I think there might be some receivers in the USFL better than Nick Westbrook Akine. But we get
Wow.
to
That's
Tampa
amazing.
Bay. Yeah, maybe that's a hot take. I don't know. But Tampa Bay's on the clock. I think outside of Green Bay, they're maybe the NFC team with the most Super Bowl aspirations in a fairly complete roster. What do you think Tampa Bay does?
Yeah, I mocked them to go with Devontae Wyatt, interior defensive
Let's
lineman out of
go.
Georgia. We got the same exact one. I was looking at the roster when me and Savoka made a video, and we were like, "Oh, what are the holes on this team?" And I couldn't even find one. It was like literally impossible. Their star players on this team. It looks like you wrote the U.S. Constitution if you write all the team or all those players out. It's that big. Like this team's amazing. But I would say that if he is here, I would be very shocked if the Bucks didn't go this way.
I think he makes a lot of sense opposite Vita Vea. You don't really have to
Yes.
rotate then and you lock down the run. I think one other position they might consider is corner. And
Mhm.
that's because they had some injuries last year. And then their secondary struggled a little bit. I won't say it was a bad secondary by any means, but they took a little bit of a step back when Sean Bunting was injured. Maybe they take like a Kyer Elam or someone like that just to shore up the position. But I think Devontae White makes a ton of sense. Packers are on the pick at 28. They already took a receiver in this mock. You think they double up? What do you think they do with their second one?
I think it would be hilarious if they doubled up there. Like, you know what, Rogers, we've done you dirty for all these years. They hadn't drafted a skill position player in the first round. I don't think ever, besides Jordan Love in the first round since Rogers has been drafted.
Their last receiver in the first round was in 2002.
Yes, that is crazy.
I don't even know how old you are, but I can't imagine it was very old.
2002, I was 3 years old.
Yeah, that says a lot. Anyway,
Yeah,
so they're on the clock here. Outside, let me just ask you this: we know receivers their biggest need. What do you think their second biggest need is?
it is probably I would think either linebacker or corner.
They have Jair. He was injured last year. They take Stokes in the first round last year. They found a diamond in the rough in Rasul Douglas, largely viewed as a failed player at the position, but he kind of reinvented his career with Green Bay. But ultimately, they're a team that's prioritized corner a lot. They spent a day three pick on Shamar Jean Charles out of App State last year.
Yeah.
They take corners early and they take them often. And I think it makes sense with the positional value. I think they're dealing with a little bit of age on the offensive line. Maybe that's a pick if you think a developmental guy comes up here. Linebacker could be another position they look at. So I have them going Devin Lloyd, who I know you mocked a little earlier. But ultimately, this is a lot of words to say. I don't know where the Packers go at 28. They could go any number of directions, I think, overall. Any last words in the Packers?
Yeah, I think that a lot of people are going to be very worried about the Packers this year that they're going to completely fall off without Adams. I'd say they're probably going to be the exact same thing, make the playoffs and then disappoint you again, probably.
They play in the weakest division in football, in my humble opinion. Now,
Yes.
we move on to Kansas City. Let's just do these picks back to back. They have two in a row. They're trying to replace Tyreek Hill. They already did that a little bit. I'm just going to say right now, MVS might have Tyreek level speed. He does not have Tyreek level skill. So I think they could be looking at receiver again here. They're also a team maybe with a little bit of a luxury of taking a position of strength outside of that. They're still trying to potentially replace like Tyron Matthew in their defensive backfield. Where do you think they go?
Yeah, so at 29, I have Jahan Dotson, and then at 30, I have Daxton Hill, safety out of Michigan. I think that, like you said, Tyran Matthew, the Honey Badger, them losing him, I think that is going to be a big loss for them. They don't have a lot of holes, like you said. I mean, finding someone to fill the role of Tyreek Hill is basically impossible. Tyreek Hill's Tyreek Hill. Same thing where I don't think the 49ers, you're not just going to find some other Debo Samuel randomly, right? That's very hard to find. There's certain players that are hard to fill. I think Jahan Dotson, though, he got so many targets, so many receptions at Penn State. I think he could potentially be very good for this Chiefs team. They do have Juju Smith-Schuster, who does not really excite me that much, but might be fine for fantasy. I think they do need another receiver, so I feel they have to go one with one of these picks. And then the other pick, like I said, I took Daxton Hill, but you have O tackle. They could really go anywhere after taking receiver.
After listening to you, I almost think that this might be a reach. And a guy, I had Bernard Raymond just to talk to you guys about that. They're showing up in a position where you always need depth. It's just a high
Yes.
value position at tackle. Bernard Raymond's a former tight end, so he's hyper athletic and he's still putting weight on his frame. He'll need a little bit of time to develop, but luckily the Chiefs can afford that. But now that you mentioned, I think defense might be a position they look at. I think corner would make some sense here in the back half of the first round if that's a position they decide they need. And the more I look at it, I think they could go edge rusher. So Frank Clark and Chris Jones, those are players with a lot of versatility in the D line. But outside of that, I'm not sure what they really have. Maybe they're a team that takes a stab on Boye Mafe or an Arnold Ebiketie towards the end of the first round. Wouldn't surprise me at all. And it brings me to Boye Mafe. I had him coming off the board to Cincinnati at 31. We'll talk about him a little bit and then get your needs at the position here or their needs with this team. But Boye Mafe is an edge rusher from Minnesota, similar to Karlaftis, just a bad defense overall for the most part. So teams could double him. Didn't have as much production as some of the elite defensive edge players, but elite athleticism, that's for sure. And Cincinnati kind of bandaged over their offensive line woes in free agency. They took a lot of players at the position, and I think it's going to be more of a committee approach to filling some of the needs they had there. They also have some needs along the edge, which is why I think Mafe could be a fit here towards the end of the first round. What do you think Cincinnati does? A team that actually made a lot of moves in free agency.
Yeah, I went with Kier Elam. If I pronounce his name wrong, I do
Yeah,
apologize.
the
Corner
corner
out of
from Florida.
Yeah, him. I think that they need cornerbacks. I mean, that defense, the reason why they lost the Super Bowl was because, well, the offensive line got Joe Burrow absolutely murdered halfway through the game. And then the corner play was just so off. I think that if you have anyone that you need someone that can cover Cooper Cup, you need someone that can cover these elite wide receivers in the NFL. I mean, somehow they stopped Tyreek Hill on the 1 yard line in that game in the AFC Championship, but not going to bet on them doing that again. So I think they need corner. I think that is by far their biggest position to need. I think they could still end up drafting an O tackle despite or an offensive lineman, despite the fact that they picked up a million of them in free agency. I think that is also a need that they do have. I think just having a lot of depth there is very important.
For sure. At corner makes a lot of sense. Kyler Elam is a player mocked at the end of first rounds a lot. Maybe even a Kyler Gordon out of Washington, the teammate of Trent McDuffie, both could make some sense. We go to 32. This is a popular position where quarterback gets mocked. And I don't even necessarily think it'll be the Lions taking it. We could see like a Lamar Jackson Baltimore situation where team of choice is interested in a quarterback at this spot. They make a trade with the Lions and get it done. We're not doing trades in this mock. So I kind of took a similar approach with receiver and went Christian Watson. And I think another position where teams might be trading up to the back half of the first round is receiver because of the astronomical money they make. Assuming Detroit picks here, you think they take the quarterback and get that fifth year?
I think they do end up taking Desmond Ritter. Do I think Desmond Ritter is worth a first round pick? No, but I think they are the Lions. I think they need a quarterback. And I think if you have Jared Goff, you might as well say, screw it. Let's see what this guy has. I mean, he didn't look amazing against Alabama. He looked far from that, but he isn't a bad player. And in a quarterback draft like this, I could see them taking Ritter here. I think Christian Watson would be perfect for the team, though, with Amon-Ra St. Brown, who showed out a lot last year. Towards the end of the season, this guy's getting like 11, 12 targets a game, which makes no sense. That's obviously not going to happen again this year, but I think that Watson would be a solid fit here. But I do think that they do end up going quarterback. Does it make complete sense? No, but I understand why teams are mocking the Lions quarterback because you don't want to have Jared Goff out there all the time.
Yeah, and just the way if you're doing like mock draft contests, the way some of these are scored, you get points for matching players to teams, and then you get points for players entering the first round. So I think if you believe three quarterbacks come off the board, regardless of who makes this pick, you probably want to mock Ritter there. I think Watson's a better fit for the Lions right now, and then maybe they can use some capital next year and try to get a legitimate signal caller. But ultimately, wouldn't be surprised whatsoever if quarterback is the direction they take. But those are the picks. It is 32 picks up, 32 picks down. We address the team needs of all these teams, and hopefully the teams get a little bit better. But Nick, I know you got a lot going on tonight for the NFL draft and over the next couple of days. Tell me a little bit about what some of your content features.
Yeah, so today, obviously, we had this video. You watched it, you sat through 50 minutes. Thank you for doing that. So later on today, I have a draft betting video over on the Odds Shopper channel. And then tonight, over on the regular DFS channel, the Awesemo DFS channel, we have a live stream starting at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, all the way until when the draft ends. Who knows when it will end? They play so many commercials. This shit might end at like 1 in the morning, but we'll be there the whole time having fun with chat. So please join if you just watch the NFL itself. You will enjoy this video or this live stream. We're going to be talking to the chat, talking about a whole lot of stuff, even outside the draft surrounding the NFL. Probably talk about the NBA as well. So please make sure that you do join. It's going to be
For
great.
sure, for sure. Go Bucks. I'm really excited for that video too. You're also going to get the live reactions of these people when they're on the channel. Is Matt Savoca and Nick Lepri. Laffy will be there for a little bit too. But that'll do it for us today. Let me know in the comment section what players you thought were really good fits or maybe where Nick and I missed. He is Nick Lepri on Twitter at Notorious Fantasy. I am Matt Gajewski on Twitter at Matt_Gajewski. Thank you guys for watching, and we will see you again next time.